Chapter 8 Missing Links, Empathy and Accountability. Randy's friend Beth. Several years ago, my dear college friend Beth was raped by a man who broke into her house and waited for her to get home. He tackled her in the kitchen, dragged her into her bedroom, tied her to her bed, and blindfolded her. He raped and abused her for over 2 hours. Earlier that evening, Beth had enjoyed dinner with old college friends, laughing and teasing about good times. Afterward, she looked forward to going home. It was the first house she'd ever owned, and she loved it. She tended the small garden, puttered around in the basement workshop, and shared cookies with the neighborhood children. She felt safe there. The day after the rape, the men and women in Beth's life moved her out of her home because they knew she could never feel safe there again. Several weeks later, we talked about that night. I asked Beth, how could someone do that to you? How are you individuals capable of such horrible acts? Her eyes filled with tears as she took a sip of coffee. She looked at me and said, Randy, if he knew what he was doing to me, to my soul, he wouldn't have been able to do it. For me, that was a moment of great clarity. Beth helped me to understand what can help abusive men to stop hurting others. The enemy of abuse is empathy. Empathy is an emotional connection to another person's experience. It's the pain you feel when your 7-year-old daughter comes home crying after being teased by older neighborhood girls. Your heart goes out to her because you love her and because you remember what it's like to be teased or bullied by older kids. Empathy helps you understand and sympathize with the anger, sadness, and fear that may face an older relative when he learns he has only 6 months to live. Empathy increases your happiness when you can sincerely share and feel another's joy. Because empathy propels you to understand and care for others, it keeps you from hurting them. People who have inadequate empathy do not only don't care when they see other people in pain, they also don't care if they cause pain to others. What you may have done to your partner probably isn't as extreme as what the rapist did to Beth. The likelihood is, however, that you allowed yourself to abuse your partner because you weren't fully aware of her as a person with feelings, needs, and wants. This is what Beth meant when she told Randy that if her attacker had known what he was doing to me, to my soul, he wouldn't have been able to do it. A poverty of empathy is a source of abuse and violence. Stunted empathy. The process of male socialization explains many of the causes of stunted empathy. Stunted isn't meant as an insulting term. Here it means that the growth and development of your empathy was hindered or stopped completely. You were taught to block yourself from feeling empathy for another boy's physical pain by coaches who screamed, hit him, hurt him. If you told some other boy that you felt sorry for someone, you were accused of being a sissy. You probably didn't know the actual word empathy in middle school, but you certainly knew that it was only for girls. Tough guys aren't bothered by feelings, right? But as a boy being socialized into manhood, you were sometimes hurt, scared, and shamed. And those painful feelings did bother you. To lessen the pain, you channeled those feelings into a numbing anger that may continue to stunt your sense of empathy. So you can call your partner names, yell at her at the top of your lungs, push her or grab her, and not see the pain and fear you are causing. Your moral compass no longer points north. and you turn into an abusive man. This is what happened to Tom. Chapter 5, The Dynamics of Domestic Abuse. Tom wasn't blind to the immediate consequences of his abusive behavior. He knew the instant he hit Sally that he had broken a bond of trust between them. What he didn't know was that the bond was cracked long before that night, and that it was his own controlling, oppressive behavior that drove Sally away from him. Sally's story. It was after the boys were born that I began to get nervous around Tom. At first, I ignored him because I thought he was just nagging when he said I should cook more and not be out in the evenings and not spend so much time at my parents' house. But he wasn't just nagging, he was serious. He insisted that I had to be home every evening when he got home from work and have dinner ready too. I hate cooking, and besides, he always got home at different times. He wanted me to give up my job at the museum after Aaron was born. I think he wanted to change me into a perfect little housewife and keep me all to himself. He never liked my friends or family. When my girlfriends were at the house, he'd act like they weren't there, and he was always cool with my parents. He acted as though loving friends and family was the same as cheating on him. It got so I was spending more time with my mom because he was always so critical at home. I tried to change to please him, but it was never enough. When I tried to talk to him, he'd clam up, and by last year, we weren't talking much at all, except for his lectures to me about how I should do things and why no one else would want me. There wasn't much going on in the bedroom either. I don't know why he thought insulting me would make me want to have sex with him, but I never really considered leaving him until he hit me. I was terrified before that when he threw the beer bottle because I didn't know what he'd do next, and I knew I wouldn't be able to defend myself and protect Aaron and Jason. Why did he have to do that? Why did he have to wreck our family by doing that? He's been doing a lot better since he started counseling. I really don't want a divorce, but it will take a long time to really trust him again. Causes and consequences. Tom's actions. Tom wanted Sally to behave like his idea of a good wife, so he lectured her about spending too much money and how to improve her spending habits, how to cook dinner, when she should be home, and how she should pay more attention to him and less to her family and friends. He wanted her available to him whenever he felt like it. He pressured her to have children and quit her job before she was ready. He was rude to her friends and barely civil to her parents. He told her that since she wasn't very attractive, no one else would want her, so she had better do as he told her. In other words, Tom used the tactics of threats, isolation, economic abuse, male privilege, and emotional abuse to try to gain control over Sally and to force her to be the woman he wanted. Consequences of Tom's actions. But if you listen closely, you can hear in Sally's story the undesirable consequences of Tom's attempts to control her. At first, Sally did try to go along with Tom. She had children before she was ready, and she quit the job she loved. She saw less of her friends and tried to visit her mother when Tom was at work. She even attempted cooking, although she knew Tom would criticize whatever she put on the table. But in spite of her efforts, Tom's abusive attempts at control increased rather than decreased because he was still responding to his unexamined assumptions about men and women and his fears of abandonment. Sally realized that she could never do enough to please him, and she began to pull away from Tom in self-defense. His constant criticisms made her anxious and unhappy in her own home. As a result, she managed to be gone more in the evenings, even with 2 young children. She spent more time with her mother, who, unlike Tom, supported Sally and loved her unconditionally. Sally had less and less interest in sex with Tom. She spent more money rather than less to try to establish a little independence from him. She gave up on dinner. Tom complained that there wasn't any food in the fridge on the night he hit her, and he was right. Although Sally made sure Aaron and Jason ate well, she didn't go out of her way to shop for Tom. In other words, the more Tom controlled, the more Sally pulled away. Tom saw her responses as further evidence that she was a poor wife, so he increased his efforts to control her. These increased attempts at control didn't improve Sally. Instead, she suffered the predictable results of Tom's abuse tactics. Her self-esteem decreased. She lost interest in sex. She spent more money. She tried to be away as much as possible. She grew anxious and afraid around Tom, and she didn't want to try to love and care for him. Tom had trapped them in the cycle of abuse that is pictured below. So in the image, we've got a cycle of abuse. So there are abuse tactics at the top in a box, and they are physical abuse, emotional abuse, coercive sex, intimidation and threats, isolation, using other people, economic abuse, and male privilege. So then there's no accountability or insight into the causes and effects of abuse, and these lead to the consequences manifested in partner, low self-esteem, depression, affairs, fear, substance abuse, sexual problems, lies and deception, anger, poor communication, poor parenting, decreased love and care, increased spending. And these cycle back to more increase in use of abuse tactics to manage and punish partner. And that goes in a cycle. Randy's client, Larry. Larry was a second-generation interstate trucker whose work frequently kept him away from home for days. He felt disconnected from his wife, and worse, when he came home, it sometimes seemed that she didn't even want to be with him. Larry was convicted of domestic abuse and referred to my group after throwing his wife, Clara, to the ground in front of their house. After he'd completed the group, he continued attending individual sessions. Larry brought Clara and their 3-year-old son, Christopher, to one of his scheduled individual appointments. I asked Clara privately if she wanted to be part of the session, and she said yes. At one point, Larry didn't like something that Clara said, and he began yelling at her. Clearly pained and afraid, she turned her face from him, stood up, and walked across my office to help Christopher play on the floor. Larry said to me in disgust, "See, Randy, she ignores me like that all the time. That's why I get so angry." He clearly thought that I would agree with him and tell Clara to rejoin us. Larry was like a poster boy for the cycle of abusive behavior and consequences. I've never seen a couple enact the steps so quickly. Of course, they had plenty of practice. Larry had been abusive from the first year of their marriage. It was obvious to Clara, why she turned away from him. But Larry did not understand that his abusive behavior was guaranteed to make Clara want to get away. In fact, Clara lost hope that he would ever change, especially after a year of counseling. She eventually left Larry. Stopping the cycle, empathy and accountability. What can Tom or Larry, or more important, you do to stop this painful, unproductive cycle? There are 2 main things to work on: empathy and accountability. We have separated these qualities to discuss them, but in fact, they go hand in hand. Empathy. Your sense of empathy may have been stunted, but that doesn't mean you can't increase it. Fortunately, empathy isn't like a plant or a puppy. If young, growing things are deprived of care and nutrients, they may never achieve their full size and strength. But empathy is not a spindly tree or a runt of the litter. It is a skill, not a gift of nature, and that means that you can practice and improve. You can learn to identify and manage the fears that undermine your empathy for your partner. You can put yourself in her shoes and try to imagine life with a partner who constantly humiliated you, belittled you, threatened your physical safety, and kept you from achieving happiness in your life. You achieve empathy for your partner. To achieve empathy for your partner, you must be accountable for your actions. Accountability. Tom knew that he broke more than the beer bottle that night, although he didn't want to admit it to himself, and he tried to minimize his behavior to the police. At the first group meeting, he announced that Sally should be in a group to learn how to be a good wife. Other men use other cover-up tactics to spotlight their partner's failings rather than their own. Men in our groups will say, "I don't have an abuse problem. She is a poor communicator." Or, "I don't have a control problem. She just spends too much." Or, "I don't have an anger problem. She just doesn't listen to me." Despite your efforts to disconnect yourself from your abusive behavior, using power and control tactics to get what you want leads to undesirable consequences, just as using alcohol does. The alcoholic in denial may tell us woeful stories of loss, conflict, and setbacks, but without making the connection between his out-of-control life and his abusive drinking. Stopping the drinking and understanding the effects it has on life is the first step in recovery, just as it is with abuse and control. The cycle will not stop. You and your partner will never have a loving relationship if you do not accept responsibility for your actions and the consequences. Poor accountability perpetuates the cycle. How do empathy and accountability work together? If you refuse to accept accountability for your behavior, you will never be able to genuinely feel the effects of your abuse on your partner. If you cannot feel the pain, fear, and heartbreak your abuse causes her, you will never feel the need to be accountable for your behavior. Empathy and accountability are like links in a chain. If one is weak or broken, the chain will fall apart. As you increase your sense of empathy and accountability, you will be able to make the right choices. You will discover more personal power and peace as you focus on your own growth and let your partner be who she is. The more you let go, the more you will create what you desire, a loving relationship with your partner. Remember that abusive behavior creates an accumulation of consequences in your partner. Stopping the abuse today doesn't stop her pain, anger, or distrust of you today. She can only begin to heal once she feels safe, respected, and honored. When you can provide her this sacred space, then you are contributing to her healing process. That's all you can do. You can't control her healing process. You can't force it to happen. You can't speed it up. The healing process may take years. You have to let go of her with respect and love. To do anything less is to enter back into the cycle. And let's face it, to use the same controlling tactics and expect different results would be insanity. Love, trust, and intimacy are cultivated by acting in loving, trustworthy, and empathetic ways.